My name is Amanda Wireman, and I'm from the Marriage and Family Therapy Program at Texas A&M Central Texas. Absolutely. It was originally inspired by Gestalt theory and came about in the 1960s. It's a client-centered approach in which the therapist has an active role, so they're very involved in the therapy. A therapist may use theatrical or dramatic activities in order for clients to gain a new perspective or new ideas, and the strategy is really emotions-based. It's focused on improving the emotional growth of the client. So in this scenario, you have a therapist that's really trying to give them that self-esteem to make those changes for themselves, and you don't really see much of a focus on their background or where they've come from. It's much more of a present focused theory. As far as the theatrical and dramatic activities, I'm going to talk about that a little bit later on in my video, but it really requires a very vivacious therapist, a therapist that's active, a therapist that wants to be involved. This is certainly not a field for someone who's more passive or quiet or introverted to go into, because a lot of the success of this treatment is heavily reliant upon a therapist who can adapt and be spontaneous and kind of try different things in kind of rapid fire. Well, straight off the bat, you have an active and creative therapist. So just your relationship with that therapist from the beginning is going to be very different than what you see with like a psychoanalytical therapist, where they kind of are more of a blank slate. They're there to just kind of project your ideas on, and that's kind of where we get the image of, you know, oh, lay down on the couch and the therapist sits behind them and you don't really make eye contact and you're just kind of talking to an empty room while they listen. Unlike that, experiential therapy, the therapist is very involved and you're not only talking to them, but you're also doing activities with them and you may be involved with it, and there's an element of physicality with this theology, that you are physically involved, you are mentally involved, emotionally involved, and you're also doing the stereotypical therapy advice or questioning and things like that. The other thing is that it focuses on the present. So in a lot of other theories, they focus on the past. So they'll say, you know, let's create a genogram, or let's look through your family history. Do you have access to family medical records? Let's really see what has caused what you're dealing with now. And so what that does is it puts a lot of the, I don't want to say blame, but there's not really much of a better word to say than that, but it kind of puts the blame on your past patterns, on your past family history, and not so much ownership on you today. Whereas within experiential therapy, it's very much, okay, we're going to focus on the present. Whatever happened in the past is in the past, and we need to focus on who you are now and where you're going. On top of that, it's also that self-awareness. It's that ownership and that responsibility of, okay, it doesn't matter where I came from, this is who I am, this is the kind of life I want, and this is the kind of life I want to lead. And the existential therapist is going to promote that, and they're going to promote that self-awareness of, do you really know who you are? Do you really understand your value and what you can contribute? I think right off the bat, my personality did. I tend to be a very spontaneous, very excitable, kind of bouncy person. I get very excited about new things and I want to try new things. And so for me, reading about, you know, Virginia Satir and how excited she was, and, you know, she'd get right down on the floor and work with props and things like that with her clients, it was incredibly interesting. I really like the personal connection as well. So for me, I love making new relationships. I love meeting new people. I love having conversations. And so experiential therapy really kind of plays into that a lot. Also on top of it, I'm very interested in my therapy career path doing a lot of nature therapy and drawing and art and things like that. And those collaborate with experiential therapy beautifully, because you're already using props, you're already using role play, you're already using so many things that I'll talk about a little bit later in the video. but you can incorporate so many other aspects into it, and it meshes well with other theories and other practices. The other thing is similarities I saw in my own family. When I was reading and researching this topic and they talked about different family dynamics and things like that, there were many things that I was like, oh my goodness, my own family growing up did this, or oh, this would have been so much more beneficial if we could have utilized this. And even things in my own marriage that I'm like, oh, what an awesome idea to try to converse in that way whenever there's conflict. So for me, I just connected with this theory so much more. Another thing is the focus on the present and not the past. As a teacher, I am an absolute firm believer on it does not matter where you came from, it matters what you're willing to put into it and what you're willing to become. What I constantly tell my students on almost a daily basis is when you walk in my door, it is a fresh start, and today is whatever you make it. And that is a teaching philosophy that I intend on carrying over well into my therapy world as well, because it's my honest personal value system. I really believe that the human mind, the human body can overcome so much, and I think that to limit it to just your past and your history and that's why you're doing these things, I think it's really, it's limiting what the client will be able to do with their life, because it's giving them an opportunity to kind of cop out of their own behaviors. So I do love that present, that mindfulness aspect of this approach. Absolutely. The first approach is sculpting, and that's where you have specific roles within your family, and the family is placing themselves in a situation in front of you where they can essentially role play and then discuss out what's happening. Something that's really similar to that is choreography, and that's where they literally are acting out a problem or conflict that is happening at a daily basis, or on a regular basis it's causing conflict. So every time the parents institute a curfew for the teenage daughter, she storms upstairs, slams her door, and doesn't talk to the family the rest of the day. That would be something that they could literally act out in my office. The other thing is props. These give the client an opportunity to express themselves in a different way because the focus is on the prop and not so much on them, so they aren't feeling as uncomfortable with that direct conversation. Props are something that I use as a teacher all the time, and I use them in an academic sense, but I also use them in a counseling aspect as well. You know, when a student comes in who's really tired and they seem withdrawn, you know, and they don't want to really talk about it, props like puppets or I love emotion stones. They're little stones that have different emotions on them, because a lot of times we fall into the trap as people of saying, oh, I'm sad, I'm happy, I'm mad. Well, there are so many more emotions we experience than happy, sad, or mad. So really getting them to choose a stone that really accurately expresses what they're feeling, like I'm feeling attacked, I'm feeling vulnerable, or I'm feeling unloved. Those kinds of things kind of help you specify what exactly they need help with. And those are things that the experiential therapist would use in their room. The props also give you an opportunity to kind of lighten up a harsh subject. So maybe it's a really uncomfortable subject, or it's a subject that they're not comfortable really sharing. Sometimes if you have 2 dolls or 2 puppets right there to use, they can talk through those props instead of talking directly to you. The other thing would be humor. And this is something that I definitely use with my students, especially when there is a conflict in the room. As described in our book and our reading, it needs to be used sparingly, and you really have to understand your client before you jump right in and use it, because sometimes that sarcasticness can be hurtful and not helpful. But if you have that relationship with your client and you think they will respond well, then that's something you can use. I see this a lot with kids who say things like, in my room, if I don't get to work on this project with my best friend, I'm gonna kill myself. And so really kind of addressing that, like, okay, well, let me explain to you the seriousness of this, and then be like, really? Like, really, is that what's gonna happen? Or, you know, kids who threaten, I'm gonna run away from home if I don't get the Kool-Aid flavor I want, you know, and that's like, okay, well, make sure you bring a big enough suitcase, you know, because you just kind of point out the absurdity of their statement, because you're really trying to make them focus on using correct language when expressing their emotions. You don't want a person expressing themselves in that way every time they have an emotion, when there's a much more concise way to express themselves. The other thing you can do is modeling eye language. And this is something that I, again, use in my classroom already, which is probably why I relate to this theory so well. When my students are upset or if they're crying and they just cannot communicate, I'll say, okay, tell me how you feel. Start your sentence with I feel, or I think, or I am, and that really draws a lot of the conversation out of them. The last thing would be family reconstruction. This is similar to a genogram, but not nearly as entailed. It's literally just kind of looking back if the therapist thinks it is helpful, like there might be a trend of mental disease in the family. They may have them make a little family tree. But what I find even more useful is the wheel of influence. And the wheel of influence, again, I use them with my students a lot. And if you're feeling small and you're feeling isolated and you're feeling disconnected from everything, to make a wheel of influence and really see how many people that are involved in your life who care about you, it has great, very strong benefits, and it really helps that self-actualization, that self-esteem that experiential therapy really want to encourage.